Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast. Let's explore the top news headlines for today, January 25th. We'll start off in Nigeria with a story about over 140 soldiers that have been released from detention in Maiduguri. Some of these soldiers were held for up to 5 years without a trial for alleged offenses, things like losing weapons to insurgents.
Yeah, it's a really complex situation, especially given the conditions these soldiers were operating under, fighting an insurgency for years on end. The reports mention some of these soldiers were on the front lines for over 6 years without leave. I mean, that's an incredibly long time to be in a high-stress combat zone. This raises questions about how these cases were handled by the military justice system and also about the potential impact of these prolonged deployments on the mental health of these soldiers.
Absolutely, and the reports do suggest that many of these soldiers are suffering from war fatigue and mental health issues. The GOC and theater commander did visit the detention centers, and a court-martial was set up to try to expedite the trials. But it seems like not all of the detained soldiers actually ended up being tried. Shifting gears a bit now to a story with some political drama. Mudashiru Obasa, the impeached Speaker of the Lagos State House of Assembly, is returning to Lagos today. He was impeached for alleged misconduct and abuse of office, including misappropriation of state funds.
What's interesting here is that Obasa actually tried to argue that his impeachment was invalid because of a technicality involving the official maces of the assembly. He apparently hid them to try to prevent the proceedings from happening, but lawmakers just ended up using an old mace from a previous assembly building and went ahead with the impeachment anyway.
Now he's set to visit his official residence under strict supervision to prevent the removal of public property, and his loyalists are already planning a welcome party for his return. Turning to international news for a moment, an Emirates flight from Dubai to Kuala Lumpur had to make an emergency landing in Bengaluru, India. The reason? A medical emergency on board. Thankfully, the situation was addressed, and the Airbus A380, the world's largest passenger plane, was able to resume its journey.
This incident, along with the recent diversion of an Air India flight, really highlights the critical need for airlines to be prepared for medical emergencies during air travel. Having a well-trained crew and efficient protocols in place is absolutely essential to ensure the safety and well-being of passengers.
Back in Nigeria, there's a legal dispute brewing over a newly established independent Sharia arbitration panel in Ekiti State. The state government has declared the panel illegal, stating that it's not part of the state's judicial structure.
This raises a pretty complex question about the role of these religious arbitration panels within a secular legal system. So this panel consists of 3 qadis, and they held their first sitting to adjudicate marriage-related disputes, but the Attorney General emphasized that existing customary courts already handle these kinds of matters. He specifically mentioned that Islamic, Christian, and traditional marriage issues are all addressed through these existing courts.
The Attorney General also warned against any activities that could disrupt the peaceful coexistence of the state, and even suggested that the panel's establishment might be politically motivated. In other news, former Nigerian military ruler Ibrahim Babangida, or IBB as he's often called, is about to launch his autobiography, A Journey in Service.
This memoir is bound to generate a lot of interest. IBB's tenure was marked by both significant developments and controversies. Think back to the introduction of the Structural Adjustment Program and other economic reforms, but also the human rights crackdowns and the annulment of the June 12, 1993 election.
The book launch is shaping up to be a major event, with President Tinubu, former presidents, and even some African leaders expected to attend. Now, shifting our focus to Kenya. The country has implemented visa-free entry for citizens of almost all African countries except Somalia and Libya.
This is a huge step towards promoting regional integration and strengthening ties within Africa. Removing this travel barrier is a way for Kenya to boost tourism, ease travel for African citizens, and encourage greater economic and cultural exchange.
Previously, you would have needed an electronic travel authorization to enter Kenya, but now most African citizens can stay for up to 2 months, and members of the East African community can stay for up to 6 months. We also have news of a flight incident. A United Airlines flight from Lagos to Washington, D.C. had to declare an emergency and return to Lagos because of a technical issue. The Boeing 787-8 aircraft experienced a sudden loss of pressure and had to make a sharp descent, causing some passengers to hit their heads on the ceiling.
It's definitely alarming to hear about incidents like this. It reminds us how important rigorous maintenance and safety protocols are in aviation. Luckily, the flight landed safely, and the airline is providing medical attention to those who are affected.
Finally, we have an update on Simon Ekpa, the separatist agitator whose activities have been causing tension between Nigeria and Finland. The Finnish ambassador to Nigeria informed President Tinubu that Ekpa's detention has actually led to an improvement in bilateral relations between the two countries.
This situation really underscores how the actions of individuals can have a significant impact on diplomatic ties between nations. Ekpa's activities were definitely hindering those ties, but his detention has been seen as a positive step by both countries.
President Tinubu commended Finland's actions, emphasizing Nigeria's commitment to the rule of law and peaceful coexistence. It's a positive outcome, and hopefully it paves the way for stronger collaboration between Nigeria and Finland in the future.
Yeah, it really shows how even actions that seem isolated can have ripple effects across the globe.
And speaking of ripple effects, let's go back to IBB's upcoming memoir launch. The guest list is pretty impressive. President Tinubu, former Presidents Obasanjo Buhari, Gawana Bubakar, and good luck, Jonathan.
Wow, that's quite the lineup. I think it speaks to IBB's enduring influence in Nigerian politics even decades after he left office. It'll be interesting to see how the event is framed. Will it be a celebration of his legacy? Or will it be a more critical look at some of the controversial decisions he made during his time in power? Or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, especially considering some of the more sensitive parts of his rule, like the annulment of the June 12 election. That event is still a major turning point in Nigeria's history, and I'm sure a lot of Nigerians are very eager to hear how IBB addresses it in his book.
Oh, absolutely. It's a topic that continues to shape politics in Nigeria even today. If he does choose to address it directly, I think it could provide some really valuable insight into his thought process at the time and the political climate surrounding that decision.
So let's shift gears now to a more positive development on the African continent. Kenya's decision to offer visa-free entry to most African citizens.
This is a really bold move. I think it has the potential to significantly impact things like tourism, trade, and cultural exchange all across Africa. By getting rid of this travel barrier, Kenya is sending a really strong message about its commitment to Pan-Africanism and regional integration.
It's definitely a welcome change from all the bureaucratic and often restrictive visa processes that can make it difficult to travel within the continent. I wonder if this could inspire other African countries to do the same thing, maybe leading to a more interconnected and prosperous Africa overall.
Yeah, there's already a precedent for it within the East African community. Member states there already enjoy visa-free travel amongst themselves, so maybe Kenya's decision could be a catalyst for expanding this model to more of the continent.
Just imagine the possibilities: easier access to things like education and job opportunities, a smoother flow of goods and services, and even richer cultural exchange.
It's a vision worth striving for, and Kenya is taking a very concrete step in that direction.
So turning back to that incident with the United Airlines flight that had to make the emergency landing in Lagos, a sudden loss of pressure in the cabin leading to a rapid descent, it must have been terrifying for everyone on board. It's really fortunate that the pilots were able to regain control and land safely, but the fact that some passengers and crew members were injured is definitely concerning.
Yeah, this incident really underscores the importance of having really thorough aircraft maintenance and making sure those safety protocols in aviation are strictly followed. I think a really comprehensive investigation will be essential to figure out what exactly caused that loss of pressure, and of course to prevent similar incidents from happening again in the future.
You're right, air travel depends on such a complex interplay of technology and human expertise. And any breakdown in that system can have some very serious consequences. Passengers are putting their trust in airlines to prioritize their safety above all else. And incidents like this can damage that trust.
Yeah, transparency in the investigation process and making sure the public is kept informed is going to be really important to help rebuild that confidence. It's a reminder that even with all the advances we've made in aviation technology, air travel still comes with risks.
So going back to Nigeria, that legal battle over the Sharia arbitration panel in Ekiti State is raising some really interesting questions about how religion, law, and politics all intersect.
Well, on the one hand, supporters of the panel argue that it offers a space to resolve disputes within the Muslim community in a way that takes into account their cultural and religious beliefs. They see it as a way to address issues related to marriage, inheritance, and other matters within a system that's familiar to them.
Right, but then on the other hand, opponents argue that the panel is actually undermining the existing legal framework, and that could actually lead to a kind of fragmentation of the justice system. They're worried about potential conflicts between the panel's decisions and those made by the established courts, and what that could mean for the country's unity.
Yeah, the state government's decision to declare the panel illegal has just added fuel to the fire. It's bringing up questions about just how much religious autonomy is permissible within a secular state. It's a complex situation that really highlights the challenges you can encounter when religious practices and legal norms clash.
It will be interesting to see how this legal battle unfolds and what implications it might have for the relationship between religion and the state in Nigeria in the long run. So let's revisit the news about the soldiers that were released from detention in Maiduguri. The fact that some were held for years without ever having a trial is a major concern. It raises serious questions about due process and the rights of the men and women serving in the military.
That's right. It's vital to remember that even soldiers are entitled to the same fundamental rights as every other citizen. That includes the right to a fair trial and legal representation. Being detained for a long period of time without ever having a trial isn't just a violation of their rights. It can also have a devastating impact on morale and well-being.
Absolutely. And while the release of these soldiers is a positive development, it really does highlight the need for some reforms within the military justice system. Making sure soldiers who are accused of offenses have access to swift legal proceedings and that they're not being subjected to arbitrary detention should be a top priority.
Agreed. A just and accountable military justice system is absolutely crucial for maintaining the public's trust in the armed forces and upholding the rule of law.
Now on to a story that's been captivating a lot of people lately, the saga of the impeached Lagos speaker Mudashiru Obasa. His return to Lagos after his attempt to overturn his impeachment has been met with some pretty mixed reactions.
Some see it as a sign of his political resilience and his maneuvering skills, but others see it as a blatant disregard for accountability and the rule of law. The allegations against him, misconduct, abuse of office, are not to be taken lightly. And the fact that he tried to avoid the impeachment process by using some pretty unconventional tactics has raised a lot of eyebrows.
Yeah, and that lavish welcome party being planned by his loyalists doesn't really help the perception that he's taking these allegations very seriously.
I think the coming days and weeks will be crucial in determining what happens next. Will Obasa face any legal repercussions for his alleged actions? Will the new speaker be able to effectively lead the assembly? Will this whole incident have any long-term consequences for the political scene in Lagos State?
So many questions that are still unanswered. Finally, let's delve into that story about Simon Ekpa, whose detention in Finland has provided some relief here in Nigeria. His actions as a separatist agitator were definitely straining relations between the two countries, but his arrest has been viewed as a positive step towards getting things back on track.
I think this case is a good example of how security threats can easily cross international borders, and it highlights the importance of having international cooperation when it comes to addressing these sorts of threats. Finland's decision to detain Ekpa really shows their commitment to upholding the rule of law and respecting Nigeria's sovereignty.
And President Tinubu's comments praising Finland's actions definitely signaled that he's open to working with international partners to combat threats to national security.
Hopefully, this situation will act as a deterrent to others who might be considering engaging in activities that could destabilize Nigeria or damage its relationships with other countries.
Before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to that story about the soldiers who were released from detention in Maiduguri. These soldiers were putting their lives on the line, fighting Boko Haram, facing incredible danger and hardship day after day. And then some of them ended up being detained for years without a trial, often for things that happened in the heat of battle, like losing a weapon.
It really makes you pause and think about the immense pressure these soldiers are under and the incredible sacrifices they're making, the psychological toll of being in combat for so long, the constant threat to their lives, and the often inadequate support they receive. All of that can lead to situations where mistakes are made.
You're absolutely right, and while accountability is important, we also have to consider the context in which these events occurred. Detaining soldiers for years without a trial, particularly for actions taken under such extreme duress, really raises questions about fairness and justice within the military justice system.
Finding that balance between supporting our soldiers and upholding the rule of law is so crucial. Providing better mental health resources, making sure legal proceedings happen in a timely manner, and fostering a culture of compassion within the military are all incredibly important steps.
I completely agree, and it's a conversation that I think we as a society need to continue having. Now, before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've covered a wide range of topics today, from the political drama unfolding in Lagos to a potential turning point in African integration with Kenya's new visa policy. But one theme that seems to keep coming up is the concept of accountability.
Accountability is essentially about holding individuals and institutions to a certain standard of conduct. It's about making sure there are consequences for wrongdoing and promoting transparency and fairness across the board.
And whether we're talking about elected officials, military justice system, or even airlines, we've seen how vital accountability is for a just and functional society. I think it's something we should all strive for, not just in the public sphere, but in our own personal lives as well.
That's a good point. How can we hold ourselves and each other accountable in our daily lives? How can we contribute to creating a culture of accountability that benefits everyone?
Those are definitely some thought-provoking questions for everyone to consider. Thank you for listening to today's top news headlines on IAMC Radio and Podcast.